Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. So who here is a truth seeker? Actually, a show of hands? All right, what I want to do today is I want to talk about truth seeking and how when you seek the truth, here, I'll sit down here, then, yeah, okay. It really does add something tangible to our environment. It changes your frequency, it changes you, and it literally acts as a rippling to go out into the world and change the world. So why do people seek the truth? Can I ask somebody some questions? Does anybody want to be brave enough to answer? No? Yeah? Okay. What's your name?
Juan.
How you doing, Juan?
Pretty good.
And this is your first DisclosureFest?
Yeah.
And how long have you been seeking the truth for?
Since I was 13.
Really? And why do you seek the truth?
I don't know. It's just in my DNA I just must know, and I must help others see.
So it's kind of like a service to yourself to help you, and also to service to others, would you say?
Yeah, the idea is if I grow myself, that would influence my environment to grow itself as well.
Right, exactly. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. So, when we seek the truth, you want to chime in? Yeah.
I do that.
What's your name?
Mark.
And how long have you been here, Mark?
This is my first Disclosure Fest. Been seeking the truth, I guess. I mean, since I was 18, just kind of. So I used to be 315 pounds a couple years back. So I mean, it was just kind of growing up with the addiction to food and fast food, and really realizing what that did to your body, and just starting to get healthy. And I just feel like it's that belief in lack and that belief in. Really, it's easy to get in this society to be taught to believe in lack and believe in, believe in fear and believe that it's an actual thing. So, getting out of that and, believing the truth and wanting, what is real. And
so it sounds like truth seeking for you has kind of been like a savior for you. It's liberated you from your life.
Definitely, yeah.
Well, congratulations on losing all the weight, brother. You look great. So that's one of the things that I came to inclusion. I started waking up in 2010, and I did so because I was researching cures for cancer at the time. And my partner at the time found this movie called The Gerson Miracle, where it talks about this guy who cured cancer in the 1920s. And, I was coming from a very scientific kind of atheistic background at the time, and I thought to myself, wait a minute, cures for cancer can't be real. We'd hear about them all over the news. They'd be everywhere. Well, come to find out, this guy did actually cure cancer in 1928. He actually testified before Congress in 1946 on a Senate panel that was hearing about ways to deal with this cancer problem, because cancer rates were spiking. And his research and his cures were suppressed because ultimately the cancer industry wanted to make money off of treating cancer and not curing cancer. So when I heard about that, it was just like my mind exploded. How is it that this could happen? And just knowing that there was actually a way to deal with cancer brought me a lot of peace and comfort and solace. It literally reduced my anxiety. I wasn't worrying about necessarily contracting cancer, but I knew that it was a problem that 1 in 2 people were going to get cancer at some point in their lives. And this is something that was going to affect my life and affect other people's lives. So if I can give myself peace of mind, then maybe I can give peace of mind to other people. So I started doing a lot of research, and what I ended up doing is proving to myself that this thing was real. And once I did that, I had this calling. I felt like I needed to share this information with the world, with everybody that I could. And I spent like a year where I was just telling everybody I could about these cures for cancer, and hey, I see you're eating some food that's not so healthy for you. Let me talk to you about this stuff. And I thought that I could just tell people what I was sharing, and it would just magically wake them up, and they'd be on the path, and they'd want to be healed. Well, it didn't work that way. A lot of people didn't want to hear it because ultimately, and this is what I discovered through studying psychology, is that your belief system and your worldview, they help you organize your reality. They help ground your reality. And if you're not careful in the way you try to share your information with people, then it can destroy their sense of reality, and now they're kind of left sitting there with nothing. And a lot of people have developed defense mechanisms, and the powers that be know how to do this, to prevent people from sharing and engaging in the unity that comes around with truth seeking. Because ultimately, the truth is all around us. We're all swimming in it. So in that sense, we're all united by our quest for truth. We're all united to try to figure out, like you were doing, try to figure out what's happening in your life, make your life better, like your life better, my life better. I'm sure everybody who's listening to these worlds, we all feel this zeal for truth in our lives. why is it that we're not working together to seek the truth together? Well, this is what got me into what I call the great work. So the great work, if anybody's not familiar, it comes from an alchemy term. And alchemy, the mainstream version is that it talks about how we're supposed to turn lead into gold, but that's actually an allegory for our consciousness, for our beingness. That when we seek to improve ourselves through the truth, through discipline, through discernment, then we literally change our consciousness, and we act as a beacon of light and radiate that light outwardly in the world. So the great work is this concept of each person hearing the call to improve themselves, and in the process of doing so, uniting to be a force of change for the entire planet and actually bringing goodness back into our world. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, well, how do we do this? If there's all this really great information, if we have these cures for cancer, if we know about ways to heal the environment through like alternative technologies, if we know about this control system that's trying to suppress us, how is it that we can work together to solve these problems? And I realized that a lot of the things that keep us separated is our tribal mentalities. And that tribal mentality comes down to how we were raised as children. So literally the very things that we're doing in our lives, they tend to work off of these old childhood traumas that we picked up from when we were our parents. And this was something that was a huge revelation for me. I'm like, oh my God. Has anybody heard of Bruce Lipton before? He talks about biology, belief, and how you can change your cells, your body through belief and things like this. And he said something when I first discovered his work in 2011 that just shook me to my foundations. He said, most of your subconscious was programmed when you were 0 to 6 years old. And you're living out that worldview, whatever you were dealing with at that time, that is playing itself out for the rest of your life. So if you don't go into yourself and seek the truth about who you are and what your personal story is, it's going to be very difficult for you to see the world with a clear eye, with a clear lens. And then ultimately, it'll prevent you from working with other people. So I really wanted to understand the fundamental basis of this, and I started studying a lot of psychology, a lot of philosophy, a lot of spirituality, and even law. I got into law because what I discovered is that the law at its core is all about developing ways for people to work together and trust so we can actually make the world a better place. So each of our personal values and our wisdom that we're accumulating in life can come together and kind of act as a giant chorus so we can radiate this positive energy outwardly all around us. So what I want to share with you guys today is that we all have what I would call childhood traumas, emotional baggage, things that are holding us back. And one of the reasons I think we seek the truth as just beings in general is we're looking to better understand ourselves and better understand the reality that we're swimming in, that we're working with. And by understanding how to process and deal with these old programs that we have, you can really liberate your consciousness, and you can see how maybe some of the things you've done in the past are holding you back as a way to kind of compensate for old problems you developed from childhood. And once you get through that process, then it's a lot easier to be tolerant, to be loving, to be compassionate with the people around you. So I study a lot of brain neurology. And does anybody study psychology at all? Anybody into that at all? Okay, great. I think I would say there's 3 pillars to awakening that are really kind of all-encompassing, and everybody studies them in their own different way. It's psychology, so to know yourself, right? Then there's law, to know how the existence works itself, whether it's universal law, whether it's laws about health, whether it's laws about, interacting with social beings. All that kind of describes the rules of the game that we live in, right? And then there's philosophy. And philosophy kind of gets a bad rap. It seems like this kind of like dry, boring thing that, only college professors deal with. But really, at its essence, philosophy is about meaning. It's about how do you derive meaning from your personal experience. Everybody has these experiences, right? What are the conclusions? What is the story that you are telling yourself as a result of your personal experiences in your life? Most of us take that for granted. Most of us aren't necessarily even in control of that process. Most of us are walking around having these automatic programs that are judging our experience in terms of something like who's gotten road rage on driving through the traffic before. I'm guilty of that, right? Well, what's happening there? You're kind of interpreting this experience as a negative, and then what does that do for you? Do you feel good when you're raging against somebody in traffic? Not really. Or if it's not traffic, maybe you're working at a job and your boss doesn't respect you as much, and the way you deal with that is you rage against your boss, right? Or you rage against your family member. You rage against your boyfriend or girlfriend, your husband or wife when they don't do something you like. And there's these programs that we have of us trying to deal with the problems in our world through these negativities. So one of the things I realize is that we have the power through choice to literally change and decide that a quote-unquote negative experience is a positive one. And when you do that, and you have faith that there is actually a positive interpretation, your consciousness will literally start to fill in the gaps for you. Now, there's really interesting science to back all this up. It's the science of courage. Has anybody ever studied that before? It's fascinating. So we have 3 centers of our brain. We have the frontal cortex. This is where the thinking part of the brain, this is where like your free will operates, right? Then you have the limbic center. This is where your emotions are. And then you have the R complex. That's where your reptilian brain is the kind of thing that likes moving around and carrying out orders. And we have this thing called the amygdala, which regulates our fear response. Now, what's interesting is that the amygdala is specifically designed to look for, amongst many things, negative facial expressions in people. So if you damage somebody's amygdala through a traumatic brain injury, they're not going to be able to see negative emotional faces. So you can make like a grimace, like, "Urgh," and they're not going to be able to interpret it. They're going to see it as positive because that's what that center is for. Now, what's interesting is that your amygdala can be hijacked. Me and Neil were actually just talking about this last night. When you go through a childhood experience, if your mother or people around you make grimacing faces at you, if you watch TV where there's negative faces, as a child, you have no way to contextualize that. So your brain is literally going to see this negative face, and it's going to trigger your fear centers, and it's going to start to act like this automatic program. Because your animalistic brain, your animalistic part of you, because we all have this animal body that we're inhabiting, this meat suit as it's called, it's designed to survive. It's designed to look for threats, and once it's found a threat, deal with the situation. But there's a human side of us, there's a spiritual side of us that's trying to come down and work with this. And that's where the neocortex is. So the animal part only wants to see things in terms of flight or freeze. The human part sees things in terms of fight. But I want to expand that definition because it sounds kind of negative. So instead of thinking about fight as like you're being a warrior and you're using your rage, think about, has anybody seen Star Wars before? Okay, really great movie, right? What does Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi constantly encourage Luke to do? Not indulge in his fear, right? Don't use hate. Use love. Use the Force. They don't say love necessarily, but they use the Force. So what's the underlying message there? Well, the underlying message is that we have these instincts. We can deal with our problems in all sorts of ways. You can deal with the person who's cutting you off in traffic by raging against them. But is that really going to get them out of your way? Not really. It's just going to screw you up. It's going to give you this negativity. And now you're going to be swimming through this negativity. And then you're literally programming your brain through the amygdala to respond negatively to all these experiences in your life. Well, if you use love, you can still deal with the situation. You can love the person that came in front of you. You can forgive them. You can see that they're just trying to get to where they're going and give them a little compassion. And then what does that do? It programs love into your neurology and your consciousness. So when you make this happen, this is what's really interesting. When you have an experience that is jarring for you, that's unknown to you, it's something that you weren't expecting, this makes you feel alert, what's called a fear response. And in a psychological perspective, when you feel fear, it's a state of alertness that you don't necessarily want to deal with, but it's there, you have to deal with it. If you develop courage, if you willingly embrace the fearful situation, if you willingly step into that situation and say, you know what, I feel like there's a positive way to deal with this, a loving way to deal with this, and you just allow that consciousness to come through, then your brain will literally start to funnel the information away from the fear centers and into the meaning centers, into the frontal cortex. And then you can develop a narrative or belief system that allows you to feel love for somebody that is attacking you, to feel love for the person that's cut you off, to feel compassion and forgiveness for your boss or whomever is the tyrant in your life that is making your life so miserable. And that's really important, because when we don't produce fear, then we can see the world through the eyes of love, and love is creative, right? Love is the most powerful force in the universe, I think. So when you learn how to seek the truth about how your own mind and consciousness work, then it gives you the power to literally do everything else in reality to make your life better and to make the lives of everybody better. And I think that's one of the critical messages that we see a lot in movies. You know, I study the control system, I study the Matrix, as it were. I'm sure people are pretty hip to the deep state, the Illuminati, the control, right? Okay. Well, these guys are master psychologists. They know our nature better than we do. They know how to take our primal instincts, they know how to take our spiritual instincts and weaponize them against us so that we're running around in circles trying to solve our various problems while in the meantime they're doing what they need to do. And one of the things that I discovered was that through faith in the goodness of all things, to actually having trust that the universe is actually always giving us exactly what we need to grow and become wise and to become mastered, then you can actually start to bias your experience to be positive. So it's kind of like assuming that something magnificent is going to happen. So I want to do a little exercise with you guys. It's a meditation trick. What we're going to do is I want you to think about something that is mildly irritating, nothing that's going to get you too crazy upset, but something that you can think about that's maybe, you know, whether it's a frustrating situation with your job, maybe a living situation, just think about it. It could be as simple and tiny as like maybe the partner you're living with isn't washing the dishes as much, something like that. Something that you've defined as negative that really triggers you. And I want you to, if everybody could just close your eyes for a moment, allow yourself to get into that space, and think about that experience. And just allow that experience to come up and just sit and observe it, just like you're watching it, almost like in a fishbowl. You're seeing this like in a fish tank. And now I want you to assign a color to it. What color does this negative experience have for you? And just sit with that color for a moment. And then I want you to imagine that that color is infusing itself into this object that represents your experience. Let's imagine it's like a ball. This color is now in this ball shape. And just sit with that for a moment and just observe it. And now what I want you to do is imagine you take 2 steps back. Now what color is around this other color? You should start to feel another color because you're separating yourself from this thing that you fear. Now take 10 steps back in your mind. How does that feel now? Do you feel like there is a reduction in the stress? Do you feel like it's more distant from you? And now imagine that color that's surrounding the negative energy is the opposite. It's like a positive color, and it's just slowly consuming that negative energy. And it's just wiping it away. And now, using the power of your consciousness, I want you to say the words, "It is good," in your mind, or out loud if you want to. It is good. It is good. It is good. And allow that faith. Just imagine, just like a child, what if this experience that you've labeled as bad actually has something to teach you? What if it's something that is like on the other side of this thing that's negative, there's this amazing upgrade to your life, to the way you see the world? And just allow that kind of, that possibility that something magnificent is right around the corner, that giddy childlike excitement just to come washing over you. Okay, you can go ahead and open your eyes now. So did anybody experience a shift in the way that they felt about their negative experience? Great, perfect. So what this is a visualization technique. This is something I learned in a book called The Structure of Magic. And it was a psychologist who studied a lot of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And what he noticed is that we have 3 ways that we store information in our consciousness. And that information gets stored literally in our bodies. So we have this kind of like energetic aspect of ourselves as soul. And then that soul kind of uses our body like a hard drive, if you will, to store this information. And people tend to have a visual way of representing information, an auditory way, or a kinesthetic way, so a feeling way. And what tends to happen is all your traumas, all your fearful ways of seeing the world, they get stuck in one way or another. And then once you have an experience, you tend to automatically interpret it as visual or auditory or kinesthetic. And using a visualization technique, you can visualize the thing that you're upset about and imagine yourself distancing yourself from it, and that'll actually move it from one system to another. So if you're a more visual person, You can use auditory, like imagine the sound is becoming distant from you. You imagine a representation of this negative experience and the sound is becoming distant from you. Or you imagine it like a feeling, like you're literally touching it, like maybe it has a sandpaper, like broken glass kind of texture, something that you wouldn't want to touch. And then it's slowly becoming softer like satin in your hands, like a lotion. So all of these are various methods and techniques you can use to downgrade this animal center of your brain, because getting back to what I was saying earlier, we have this animal nature. It's trying to keep us in survival mode all the time. And if you're not careful, if you're not conscious, then that part of you that gives meaning to your experience, that allows you to see the positive, gets cut off. And you just automatically start interpreting things as negative all the time. So this is what I would like to call a self-mastery process. It's taking your own knowledge of self, and then through various techniques, using this knowledge to improve yourself, and then by extension, improve the world. So people believe in the idea of frequency and raising our vibration. Can I see a show of hands? Probably a lot of people here, right? Okay, great. Well, this isn't just like New Age hooey. There's actually like a lot of science to back this up. You can take an EEG, which is an electroencephalogram, and measure brain waves. And you can take an EEG, which is an electrocardiogram, or EKG, sorry, and you can measure heart waves. And if you compare those two together, then you can see how in resonance the brain and the heart are. So if you're in a really fearful state, if you're in survival mode, what tends to happen is your brain and your heart are not synchronized. And they're really fighting against each other. Now, what's also interesting is when this happens, you release a lot of life force energy. Has anybody heard of Loosh before, or how these negative entities feed on our fear? Okay, yeah, sounds like a lot of people. Well, there's a scientist by the name of Fritz Albert Popp. He studied these things called biophotons. And biophotons are these little light pulses, very similar to bions that Wilhelm Reich was researching, that our cells use to communicate with each other. And when you're in a fearful state, where you're in a sympathetic response, when you're in a triggered response, your brain and heart get out of sync, and you just start shedding biophotons like crazy. These aren't necessarily all bad. Sometimes you need that. So has anybody heard of instances where there'll be a car accident and a mother will lift the car off of her child to save her child? And science has like no idea, how is it that she can even do something like that? Well, it's because literally in that moment, she's shedding all these biophotons and she's using that energy to save her child. So it's not that when this happens, it's always bad, but it can be hijacked. Obviously, if you're not careful, you can develop a narrative, you can develop a belief system about your life that makes it so that you always tend to see enemies and specters and problems everywhere, right? And let's face it, we're kind of living in a world where that's kind of a reality in a certain sense. There are people that aren't necessarily have our best interests at heart. But to get to the Star Wars analogy, we don't have to use hate. We don't have to use fear. We can use love. We can use courage. We can rest on our personal sovereignty and our mastery and develop ourselves to become more competent and sovereign in the world, and then deal with these situations as a master instead of like a frantic student. So when you develop the ability to give meaning to your experience, when you ask yourself the question, what lesson, what mastery am I being given in this experience that I'm having right now, no matter what it is, and have faith that it's actually possible to have that meaning, you literally start to train your brain to divert that information away from the fear and animal centers and into the meaning-generating centers of the neocortex. And you literally start to change your biology and the way you see the world. When the brain and heart synchronize with each other, like I was mentioning earlier, it raises the vibration in the sense that you start to have upper-level harmonics. So when the brain and heart synchronize, you experience a lot of bliss, you experience a lot of happiness, the biophotons stop shedding, and you start to use your own energy just for you. You're not shedding it out. So these, whether it's a person who's like a psychic vampire, or a narcissist, something like that, or it's literally like a negative entity that's attached onto you, if you learn how to love and embrace your own experience with love, no matter how hard it is, then you're literally cutting off these negative energy centers, and you're reprogramming your brain out of trauma, out of fear, out of control, and now you start to become a master of your own self. Who doesn't want that, right? I didn't grow up in a perfect life. I had lots of problems when I was a younger person. I had an addiction issue when I was a young person. I had to face a lot of things in my life. I'm sure everybody has their hardships and their stories. And one of the things I think is really important to consider is the hero's journeys. Everybody thought of the hero's journey before? So if you haven't, really cool thing to think about. The hero's journey is the story of a hero, protagonist, who's safe in his little village. He's doing his thing, or her village, you know, and everything seems great, but then someday something happens. A challenge gets thrust onto him, and he doesn't want to face it necessarily, but in order to deal with the situation, in order to protect his village or protect himself or his loved one, he has to deal with a situation that he wasn't necessarily prepared to deal with. So he has to go out and face the dragon, you know, and conquer the dragon, and then the result, save the village. And he doesn't know if he's going to be able to do this, but he has to have faith that it's possible. And then in the act of doing so, he transforms himself. One of the things that often happens in the hero's journey, which they use in movies all the time, is the hero goes through some massive, like, dark night of the soul moment, and then in the act of going through that dark night of the soul moment, they lose their infancy. They cease to be a child in relation to their experience. Now they embrace the hard truth. They didn't necessarily want to do it, but in the act of doing so, they unveiled and awakened this part of them that didn't even know was there. And that's something that I've personally experienced in my life. It definitely sounds like something that you experience in your life, you know? And we all have that. We all have these moments in our lives of hardship, of pain, of things that we didn't want to have to face. It's an initiation. I would call it a cosmic initiation. And because of free will, we can avoid that lesson, can't we? You can avoid it for years. You can die and never have truly embraced the challenges of your life, as many often do. But when you embrace those challenges, what ends up happening? You unlock this potential within yourself. Each of us have this potential. It's like we have this hero inside of us that's trying to claw outside of the shell of our beingness and kind of hatch itself into the world. So one of the things that I would really, I'd say is probably the most important as far as what I've learned in my life is that the things that aren't necessarily things that I enjoy or their challenges or hardships, they have the greatest opportunity to teach me something. And if I can embrace that and have faith in the goodness that will come from that, then what often happens is wisdom and opportunities just manifest themselves, you know? It's kind of like the law of attraction. I'm sure people have heard of the law of attraction before. I think that's part of it, you know? We live in a universe of free will. What is the counterbalance to free will? It's universal law. How is it that my free will can dominate all of your free wills? Is because we have this thing called universal law that's kind of protecting everybody's free will. So that way I don't step on your shoes and you don't step on my shoes, or we can do our thing for the most part, right? Well, when we interact with the world, every time we make a choice, then we get feedback from the universe. And the choices that we made 10 years ago, we're still feeling that feedback, aren't we? You know? If you made, let's say you made a choice to become, you know, an alcoholic or something 10 years ago, you're feeling that choice today, aren't you? Of course. So if you embrace these opportunities in your life, then you can really do the work of actualizing your spiritual potential. And when you actualize that spiritual potential, you gain what I would call sovereignty. You gain maturity. You know, one of the things that I study a lot of law, and I'm trying to figure out how is it that we can really make the world a better place. You know, we can talk about all sorts of things, but if we're all in our little camps and none of us can talk to each other, then can we really be as effective as if we really united? I mean, who doesn't want clean water? Nobody raised their hand, right? Who doesn't want clean food? Nobody raised their hand, right? Who doesn't want to end crime and corruption and things like this? We all do, of course. But are we working together in a collective fashion to do some of these things? A lot of us aren't, and there's reasons why. And one of the things that I think is important to talk about is how do we actually start to work together to form these coalitions, to form these groups so that we can really have an impact. And I think what we're doing here today at DisclosureFest, I mean, this is a beautiful event. There's a camp here, there's a tent here. Everybody has these various sections where there's really important issues and things to talk about. But we're all gathered under the same basic banner, which is disclosure. Now, what's interesting is disclosure means to reveal that which is hidden. So when you're seeking the truth, when you're seeking to understand reality, you're acting as a disclosure agent for yourself. You're knowing thyself. And then you can share that with other people. And if we develop the ability to speak non-combatively, you know, so you have compassion with people, where if they don't accept your truth right away, you're not like trying to beat it down with their head, you know, their mouth with like a hammer or something like that, then you can develop social rapport and harmony with somebody so that we can actually work together on these grander issues. So who here would like to live in a world where we have free energy technology, we don't have to pay for anything? Amen, brother. Who would like to have clean food that actually makes us healthy? Who would like to grow up in a world where we don't have to worry about, all the debauchery like pedophilia and, the control system, all this stuff? All right here, right? So how can we as a people work together on this? What are some of the fundamental problems that lead to these situations? We have a lot of awareness being raised, but are we asking these questions of each other to say, how do we contribute as a people to these problems? And this is where taking responsibility, remember I was talking about earlier, the hero's journey. It's very easy to take responsibility for something in your life, right? But are we also able to take responsibility for the collective aggregate that all our choices are making? And that's a really hard thing. It takes a lot of courage to say, you know what, maybe what I have done or maybe haven't done is making it easier for some of these problems to proliferate. Maybe I'm not buying the right food. Maybe I'm not voting with my dollars correctly. Maybe I'm watching too much TV or something. I'm not listing things that people shouldn't do, but I'm just throwing it out there that we have all of these activities that we're doing in our lives, and the aggregate of that, all of it creates the world that we're living in. So if we as a people can sit down at the same table, we all want clean food, we all want clean water, we all want clean shelter, and we can start to just openly and compassionately share our truths with each other, then we can start the process of developing what's called mutually agreed upon truths. And that's what forms the basis of a culture that can actually make and change things. There's been many times throughout history where people have gathered together to put an end to corruption, to put an end to tyranny, and it was a beautiful thing, but it only lasted for a little while because we kind of forgot the ancient wisdom of just how to sit together in community, in love, and share our compassion with each other, share our wisdom with each other. Because each of you, this is one of the interesting things, there's this singular truth that we're all swimming in, right? Everybody's looking at me speak right now, but you all have a different perspective on, the situation, right? So if you only try to focus on one person's perspective, you have to suppress everybody else's perspective. But if we all share our perspectives and we find a way to share that in unity with each other, now each of us, because we've heard the other person, now we have a holistic, we have a fractalized, we have an expanded perspective. Now I'm not just seeing the world through my eyes, I'm seeing the world through your eyes, I'm seeing the world through your eyes, I'm seeing the world through your eyes, and that better informs us. And then once that happens, we can have more compassion for each other to work in a way that can actually change things in a permanent fashion. So let me just check my time here. Oh yeah? Okay, great. So yeah, one of the things that I think is really important is learning how to seek the truth using discernment. I studied a lot of discernment. I'm sure people have heard of discernment before, right? When we talk about discernment, there's multiple different ways. There's what I would call like an energetic discernment, so like your gut, so you can read a piece of information or hear what somebody says and you can feel it resonating in your gut. I'm sure everybody's experienced that to some level. Well, there's this other kind of discernment that's also valuable. It's more of an intellectual, philosophical discernment. In philosophy, they call it epistemology. And what it is you want to take a piece of information, you want to ask substantive questions to see like, okay, well, is this really true? And if it's true, what does it mean? And when I started studying this information, I woke up in 2010 and I'm reading about like cures for cancer and UFOs and, and conspiracies and, death camps, FEMA camps, all this craziness. And then also this really positive information about like 12-strand DNA and things like this. And I'm like, wow, there's so much out there, but how do I know if any of it's true or not? Like, what's going on? And one of the interesting things I discovered is that there really is this like ancient science to discernment that has been purged from our society. One of the things that happened after the Rockefellers took over the education system in the 1800s is they started removing critical thinking and philosophy from education. And there's a reason why, because as I was talking about earlier, we all are trying to interpret our reality. We're all trying to make sense of our experience. So in a way, we're all philosophers. But philosophy isn't just this like automatic thing. You have to learn how to do it properly, just like anything else. So we have this gut, this energetic discernment. And what the energetic discernment tends to do is it tends to give us an assessment or a readout for how we feel about a piece of information. So if I said that I heard from a whistleblower that there was going to be a big announcement next week that free energy was going to come out and the deep state was going to get taken out, how many people would resonate with that, right? Yeah, you'd be a fool not to, right? So that's something that resonates with you. It jives with your belief system. So that's what the energetic discernment tends to do, is it gives you a way to know whether or not what you're seeing resonates with your belief system. The logical discernment is one that asks you to think about it kind of the opposite. It tries to get you almost in the observer's perspective and say, well, let me assess this. Even if I don't want it to be true, let me allow myself to think about it might be true, to see what it might mean. And this is where the kind of philosophic discernment comes in. So if somebody makes a claim about, it's going to be raining today, how do you know if it's going to be raining? You probably have to go out and look to see whether or not it's raining, right? If I tell you as an authority, let's say I'm a weatherman, well, you're going to just believe me if I tell you, if you believe in authority or something like that. Well, what you want to do ideally using a logical discernment process is you want to try to get your prima facie data. You want to look as much as possible to see with your own eyes. But sometimes you can't do that. Like if you're eating in a restaurant and the cook comes running out of the restaurant or the kitchen and he says, the food's poison, nobody eat the food. Do you have time at that moment to take a chemical sample and analyze it to see if there's something funky in the food? Probably not. You have to make a strategic decision in the moment. It's like, well, I don't want myself or my family to get sick, so we're just going to go somewhere else. So in a lot of ways, discernment from a philosophic perspective, from a kind of scientific perspective, is you trying your best to gather information, but you have to make a decision at some point. And the key is really to stay open-minded. And this is really what I think the big answer is that when you're discerning information, if you're going from your gut, that's great. You're going to get an assessment. But don't close the door at that point. Leave yourself open, because you're going to learn more as time goes on, and that will ultimately inform you about what's happening in the rest of the world and what's happening in the reality. You also need to keep an open mind when it comes to logical forms of discernment. So if you're being really discerning from a scientific perspective, one of the things that happens with a lot of scientists is they get really locked in their own kind of scientific dogma, and they can only see the world through chemistry, or they can only see the world through psychology, or they can only see the world through whatever their chosen viewpoint is. And what you really want to do is have a nested or holistic process. So you want to use your gut, you want to use your mind and your consciousness, and you want to stay open-minded, because we all have a limited perspective, like I was saying earlier. Everybody's got their unique perspective on this experience. And we want to get to the point where we can share our information in a way that allows other people to put their opinion in without it feeling defensive to us, So with discernment, one of the reasons it's important is we develop the ability to create a better map of meaning, a map of the world. So one of the interesting things about the way we navigate consciousness and we navigate experiences, we're not really dealing with the world directly. We're dealing with a version of it that we create inside of ourselves. I like to call it the biological virtual reality environment. Kind of a fancy term for it, but that's basically what's happening. So has anybody heard of a talisman before? Talisman's very similar to a reality, but yes. So a talisman is an object that we imbue with some power that affects our consciousness. Okay? So if you expand that concept kind of outwardly, everything in your reality is a talisman, because everything has a meaning associated to it. What happens if you've ever lived in a house where some really intense situation happened, like maybe your parents got divorced, or you broke up with a significant other, and now that place is kind of tainted with that negative energy? Well, that's because literally what you're experiencing in your reality is a replication in your own consciousness, and your consciousness assigns all this meaning to every single object in your experience. So by understanding that process and taking control over how you determine your own experience, you can literally change these negative talismans and you can create positive talismans. One of the really good things, I study a lot of relationship dynamics, and breaking up with somebody is a really intense experience. It's arguably one of the most traumatic experiences that people will tend to feel in their lives. And one of the best things you can do is just clean your room afterwards. And it tends to wipe all that negative energy away. So one of the things we tend to do in our lives is you go to work, you have your office, you have your job, and you're just in this space where, maybe you're automatically thinking about things negatively because your boss is really hard on you and you're not really working a job you love, and, there's all this like stuff that's just holding you down. And that's just kind of like in the background of your mind, just kind of like smearing your whole reality with this negativity. It's like the opposite of a smudge stick, It's like you're just smearing it with all this negativeness. And if you're not careful, then before you know it, you've kind of boxed yourself into this reality for yourself that's really negative. So by learning how to transmute that, by having faith in the fact that something could be good, and then going through various steps and processes to deal with that, you can change the biological virtual reality environment. You can do chanting. That's a really good opportunity or example of that. You can, using intention, you can use your voice to very similar to like a singing or a dance. If you're in your house, for example, and you want to raise the vibration of your house, imagine the most joyful moment you've ever had in your life, and just sit with that in your consciousness. And then imagine that you could express that as a sound that you can make with your voice. And then just walk around in this kind of meditative state and allow that to sing out from your voice. And imagine it like the walls just literally like sucking up this positive energy. One of the things I like to imagine for me is really positive memories is coming home down on Christmas Day and seeing like all the presents. And it was a big family event. I didn't have to worry about school or anything. It was just like joy, happiness, right? And I just get filled with this really big happiness. And then what I'll do is in the morning I'll wake up and I'll kind of I'll connect with that moment of like pure joy and happiness. And then I'll like literally imagine it like a bubble just like exploding out into my reality. Like everywhere is just being filled with joy and happiness. Everything's like opening up a present for the first time on Christmas. It's just filled with this like excitement, like something amazing is going to happen. And what I noticed was all of this negativity just started slowly like disappearing from my life. It was like taking a sponge. Instead of smudging something with negativity, I was smudging it with positivity. So this all to kind of bring it back around, we talk about truth seeking. And normally we talk about truth seeking, we're talking about conspiracies or health knowledge or ascension or whatever it happens to be, but it tends to be out here often, But seeking the truth also is in here. And one of the interesting things is that you don't really know yourself. The way you know yourself is through interacting with the world. Like, I don't know if I'm going to like a certain food dish until I go and try it. And then when I eat it, now I get a response. Now that kind of tells me a little bit about who I am. So when you have the ability to go out and explore your reality, but also explore how you interact with your own experience, and just sit and observe, then you're really knowing yourself better. And in the act of knowing yourself, you can choose to interpret your experience in a way that's ultimately positive and upwarding and uplifting. So when I talk about seeking the truth, I often talk about self-mastery. So we have this ability to master ourselves. I like to think about life as like a video game, because there's these rules in the game. And I'm sure a lot of people have played video games before, right? Okay. So if you tried to not follow the rules in the game, what's going to happen? Probably not going to get too far, right? You might just be running around in the beginning place where you're, shooting guns or something like that. But you're not going to be able to do the really cool stuff in the game, are you? Okay. So if we think about life as a video game, then there's these things built into life that are trying to teach us something. They're trying to make us better. They're trying to improve our skill set, just like a video game. And if you embrace those, then you become more mastered and you literally start to climb up the ladder of life. So when you gain knowledge of self, when you know thyself, and you really start to master your own beingness and your consciousness, then that's where all of the magic starts to happen. And then you actually become a change agent for good in the world. So one of the things that I think is really helpful to understand is that we have, I would say this kind of plays out, you might say the grand game of life is learning how to balance and harmonize our spiritual instincts and our values versus our animal instincts and our values. Our animal instincts are trying to keep us in survival mode. They try to see the world in terms of fight or flight, in threat and not threat. Well, the human instincts, that has the ability to coordinate that. So one of the things that's interesting about looking at the world from I'll use a rather benign example, like eating food. So if you're going to eat food, let's say you imagine the dish that you just really love. You really like pizza, for example, vegan pizza, something like that. Well, if I gave you that vegan pizza today and you hadn't had it for 6 months, you'd probably enjoy it. Like, it'd be, oh my God, so good, right? But if I gave it to you for a month straight, you'd probably be like, if you give me any more damn vegan pizza, I'm going to hurt you. And the reason why is because our brain is designed to normalize things. So we have these experiences that we're having, and we're constantly getting less and less stimulus off of these experiences. And that's the animalistic mind is designed to downgrade that. And when you use your human mind, when you use the spiritual mind to infuse new meaning because you're thinking about things and you're taking an active role in your consciousness, then the world ceases to be like plain and boring and dull, and now it takes on a whole new life. And you literally have the ability to renew your experience all the time through using active philosophy and spirituality. So this is why I would say, if you really want to master yourself, you got to develop a concept of the divine. And the divine, from a purely philosophic, all that means is the total unity and coordination of all things. How does everything relate to everything else? Is there an answer to that? What is the answer to that? And that asks a question. That's a meaning-generating question. If I asked you, how is your experience today of coming to DisclosureFest connect to every other experience in your life and what will happen in the future, that's going to activate your inquisitive nature. You're going to start to think like, well, I don't know. And, frankly, who does know? But that's the whole point. The answer isn't necessarily the important part. It's the question that's the important part. It's the question, like Neo or Morpheus says, it's the question that leads you to places like this. It's the question that leads you to looking for better ways to understand your life and your experience and what ultimately you can create the best life possible. So I would say coordinating and learning how to manage all of your animalistic instincts and doing that in love and in trust and in ways that constantly expand things is really what actualizes your spiritual nature and your divine nature. A really good way to think about this too is in terms of coordinating your experiences with love and trust and fellowship. So we're all living in this world where we need to survive. We're all living in this world where we need food and water and things like this. I could try to do that by taking your food and your water, but then that's going to cause you harm, right? Now you're not going to have food and water. So, but if I learn how to speak with compassion, if I learn how to speak with trust and recognize that you actually are a sovereign being with rights, that you have your own mind and your own beingness, well, we can work together to try to solve these problems, can't we? I mean, we're living in a world of abundance. I mean, just look at how much abundance there is. Even with all the control systems, we're just like, abundance is everywhere, right? So what if we, together, learn how to unite our wills and our minds and our consciousness to solve all of these problems that we're all facing? We're all going to go back into our little lives after this, after this event. And it's going to be very easy to kind of separate from this beautiful energy that comes here. I mean, the meditation is going to start here in a couple hours. And that meditation has incredible power to connect us energetically. And I would say, like, as a daily practice, just, think about what is it that you can do to better serve your fellow man and serve, yourself. Is there people in your lives that you can connect with, that you can begin that dialogue with, to begin a connection with? One of the things that I really like to focus on is restoring the human family. We're all living on this world together. We all have these challenges to face together. And we're living in an age where we actually have social media and things like this to connect with each other. It's pretty remarkable. I mean, for thousands of years, people were living in these isolated tribes and they couldn't really barely connect with each other. But now we can connect with each other. And I think it starts with being willing to listen, being willing to speak our truths with compassion, and just start the process of dialogue. A painter doesn't become a master as soon as they pick up a paintbrush. We as human beings aren't going to solve these problems in the blink of an eye just because we decided to do it. We're going to do it because we start the process. And sure, it might happen in the blink of an eye. I'm not taking that off the table. But if we don't get to the table, if we don't start the process of talking with each other and having faith in the love that we can do that, then it won't happen at all. So, yeah, you have a question? Sure. Well, one of the things that's interesting is that the reason we branch off into these separated groups, these tribal groups, like, you believe in, I don't know, you're a Trump supporter and we got, Clinton people over here, whatever it is. Politics is a good example. It's because we yearn for connection with other people. And one of the things that's interesting is that the control system knows this, and they create a lot of division because they know that we're going to try to have connection with other people as much as possible. So realize that at the end, behind your kind of tribal divisionist thinking or other people's is really an ultimately desire to connect with people because people feel isolated. So if you can have compassion with somebody and just hear them out, you don't have to believe them, but just learn how to entertain somebody else's beliefs. Just like a child, when you're reading a bedtime story to a child, they can learn a lot from hearing the story. It doesn't have to be true in order to learn a lot. Well, you can use that same basic idea to listen to other people. One of the things that I would say in my social work that I do is just take a genuine interest in other people's lives. What is important to them? What do they care about? Why do they love what they love? Even if it's not something that you happen to love, just listen to them honestly. Give them a chance to speak, and care about them. And what often happens is you'll develop a rapport with them. One of the things that I learned from reading the Urantia book, which is a massive tome of information, but it says, one of the masters that's talking about how to raise the consciousness of the planet says, when you're trying to share truth with somebody, instead of trying to, like, as a campaigner, just dump your truth into them, listen to what they have to say. What is important to them? What are their truths? What are their beliefs? No matter how broken or imperfect they are, if you can listen to what somebody else has to say and then just drip in your wisdom and your information in the way that they can hear it, it creates that connection. So I would say, to answer your question, focus more on developing a connection and love with somebody than trying to make your version of the truth be the right one that gets heard. And have your truth be like, that's a goal in the future, but really I care more about connecting with you as a human being than I do about you believing what I do. Make sense? No. Sure. So the question was, how do you navigate social interactions on social media? Well, we, as creatures, we are psychologically driven to express ourselves and want to have social recognition. So we all want to express what is in our hearts, what we value, what we want to do. And we want other people to reflect that back to us. So because of that, if you, as somebody who knows about these things, what you can do is you can make the first step. Give somebody the chance to express their truth, even if you don't necessarily believe it. It's okay. If you know your truth long enough or good enough, is somebody else's truth really going to hurt you by just simply listening to them compassionately? Not really. But what it'll do is it'll give them a chance to discharge. A lot of the things that happen on social media, the angst, the anger, the division, is because, as soon as somebody says something that doesn't agree with you, you're just like ready to like smash them down and like throw them into the wolves. I mean, I'm sure none of you here would do that, of course. But, one of the things that's important is just allowing somebody to speak and just entering a discussion with them. Focus on the ideas, ask them questions, and that will often downgrade a lot of the antagonism. Did you have a question?
Yeah. I myself am very open to the concept of past life because, to me, I see that as the great equalizer of our soul's journey. In each lifetime, we're supposed to learn certain things, but I've met many people in my lifetime who are struggling with painful issues with parents or divorce, or maybe they were born in a very difficult environment, and so they turn to alcoholism, drugs, and they're stuck in this mode of that's the only relief or pain that they get is to just drink or take drugs. And what would you offer as guidance or suggestion for them to start to get out of that box?
Sure. Great question. So the question was, how do you help somebody or encourage somebody to get out of a drug situation, or even just a alcoholism, or just a mental trap, whatever. Addiction doesn't even have to be a part of it. Well, I would say one of the things that's really important is we guide our lives by personal narrative. Every single one of you has a story. You're a character. You're the main character in your story that you've told yourself. You've been developing your entire life. But do you think about life that way? Not really, usually. You know, we don't necessarily think about it that way. But it does guide everything that we do and we think about. So if you're, let's say you're working in a job that you've been there for 30 years and, you know, your boss is a jerk and, you know, you've got a family that you're supporting, but they don't even really appreciate it. And, you know, it just seems like no matter what you do, it's just, you're not fulfilled in life. Well, you're going to interpret your life in that way. You're going to create a narrative that makes things negative for you. So what you want to try to do is re-examine your life. Take a step back. I would say going on an extended meditation is very helpful, because what tends to happen is you get stuck in these cycles and you start automatically interpreting everything in a certain way. And if you just get out of your headspace for a little bit, whether it's a day, a week, a month, then often if you have the right intention, you can ask yourself the question, well, what can I change about the way I see my life? Maybe I need to change my narrative. What is it that I can do to make my life seem empowering? Is there something I'm doing at my job that I've been telling myself I hate for 20 years that is actually doing something good for me?
But
What's the silver lining, you know?
why do you have to turn to alcoholism or alcohol to relieve your pain? How do you get out of that?
Well, from a medical standpoint, the reason you're turning to alcoholism is because the alcohol, you've decided at some level that that's your way out. So it becomes a talisman. Becomes a way for you to release this tension. And they've actually studied neurologically that when you have whatever your addiction is, whether it's cigarettes, alcohol, you know, biting your fingernails, whatever your vice is, when you do that thing, it's like a ritual. It's a self-care ritual. You literally start to align your brain and heart, and you start to relieve this stress. So if somebody is having an addictive behavior, what it is, it's actually their survival mechanism for dealing with a situation that they haven't figured out a way to deal with. And ultimately, this is where the courage response that was coming in earlier. When you get into a situation where you're like, I can't do anything to change my life, now you're in fight or flight mode. Now your animalistic centers are firing and you have no way to deal with the situation. If you believe that it's possible, that there is a positive way out of whatever your situation is, and you keep investing yourself in that choice, eventually your mind will literally start to give you the answers as insights. And if you keep following that energetic trail and pulling that energetic cord, you'll start to unravel the prison that you've written for yourself in your life, and you'll create a new life matrix, a new life path, a new life narrative that makes life more rewarding and fulfilling. So, actually, probably got to wrap up here, right? Yeah. Okay. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate everybody taking the time to come to this event. DisclosureFest is awesome. Yeah, give yourself a big round of applause. Because seeking the truth and making the world a better place is something I'm very passionate about. I think all of you are passionate about it, and we can and we will do this one step at a time. Much love, everybody. Thanks. Justin and Deschamps here. Take care.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to everybody who just joined us. We're going to get into our next presenter in a few minutes here, Laura Eisenhower. And just to let you guys know, my name is Neil with Portal to Ascension, and we are basically a conscious platform for a one-stop shop for consciousness. We've been producing conscious events, webinars, retreats, tours for over 10 years now. We have a website where you can sign up, and it's almost like Netflix for consciousness via webinars where you get to interact with speakers like Laura Eisenhower, Michael Tellinger, Billy Carson, many, many more through a webinar system. And we actually have a conference coming up in October, and if you see the banners with all the speakers, those are the speakers that are going to be there, and all the flyers are on the table right there. And the way I like to explain it, it's like a sound healing concert with UFOs in ancient history, you know, because it just funnels in. It's an experience from the beginning to the end. And we are Portal to Ascension, meaning that we are all aspects, full circle awareness, from telling you about the lies and the manipulation and funneling it into the fact of the big picture. This all happened in the first place, and how we're meant to experience this duality, and when we get to the epitome of duality is when we go back to the one, you know?